Hey everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, An Actionable Plan for Network Segmentation, Insight from the Security Policy Company. We're going to be starting in just about 2 minutes when everyone joins, so for those joining us later on demand, you can skip right to the 2-minute mark and the presentation will start there. All right, everyone, welcome to today's webinar, An Actionable Plan for Network Segmentation, Insight from the Security Policy Company. My name is Dan Rowe. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager at TUFN, and I'm joined by my colleague, Erez Tadmor, who's the Senior Product Manager at TUFN. Erez, are you on the line?
I am. Great being here.
Great. Thanks for joining us. So for everyone that's joined us today, here's a quick overview on your screen of what we'll be covering today. We have an hour booked. We're hoping to cover everything in about 45 minutes. First and foremost, why we're here, some of the benefits associated with segmentation, how you can actually start segmenting your network, a couple common pitfalls that we've seen clients fall into in the past and different ways to avoid them, and then, of course, how to continue segmentation as kind of an ongoing process. Lastly, we'll wrap up with some Q&A from those in attendance. Throughout the presentation, there should be an opportunity to enter questions into a box to the right or down below. If you enter them as we go, we'll try to answer them as we cover the topics, and if we can't get to them then, we'll certainly do it at the end. So a little bit about TUFN. We're the leader in network security policy orchestration. The company was founded in 2005. We have over 400 employees worldwide. We have over 2,100 customers in over 50 different countries. Speaking of countries, we have global offices all across the world with full 24/7 support. We've had consistent year-over-year growth, having been cash positive, and over half of the Fortune 50 customers all use TUFN in some capacity. And at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a number of the different accolades and awards that we've seen from industry journals and thought leaders. So I think right as we kind of get into it, obviously everyone that signed up for this has some interest in segmentation, and it's always something that we're regularly asked by clients in how to develop a segmentation strategy, how to develop iterations for, but usually it's prompted by a couple different reasons, and Erez is, I think, the more familiar with those in his conversations with clients. So Erez, like, what are the main reasons businesses would pursue a segmentation strategy to start with?
Yeah, well, Dan, this is a very good question because we may think that there's a certain reason for that, but actually there are a couple of them. But first and foremost, and maybe the more repeatable one, is the security side of things. Practically, when you think about it, segmentation enables an operationalization of the security policy. However, it is typically motivated by some business goals that attach to it. The first one, as we have here in the presentation, in the slide, is the compliance state, right? So policy should align with compliance. Also, segmentation, when you think about it, makes compliance more visual and easy to understand and easy to audit. So this is another reason why people, like organizations, want to have segmentation. Of course, it also helps to know what existing policies are not compliant and ensure that when such a situation occurs, you're being introduced with violations that are then could be tracked and reviewed and actioned upon. So this is one thing, compliance, security and compliance. Second one is access control. So you want to basically control and prescribe who can access what asset through a referenceable guide. And this guide is the segmentation. Also, policy modification is should be based on a certain policy, right? You set up a certain policy through segmentation. You want to make sure that any changes going on in your network going forward is based on that policy. And that policy is a segmentation policy when change in the network occurs. Also, having security teams which are highly important and occupied function in the organization to not only review risky access and disapprove them, right? You want to have security teams which are a highly valuable asset in your organization to deal with the exceptions, to deal with the requests which are out of the policy, out of the segmentation policy. And when you set up a segmentation policy and attach to it a proper automation tool, this will make sure that your teams, which are again highly valuable assets to your organization, are highly occupied, will only need to deal with the exceptions. Another area which segmentation is highly relevant is obviously performance. This is more for the network side of things. You want to make sure that you have segmentation not just for security, but also to make sure that only the relevant assets in your networks are being operated and in a smart and logical way. So this is another highly good reason for segmentation.
Sure, yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And Erez, I think given the fact that as an organization we're probably more keenly focused on security policy, can you share a little bit more about what some of those benefits are associated with segmentation across those different categories you just mentioned?
Sure, I can do that. As we can see here on the slide deck, we have a few benefits, if we may, that while doing segmentation you're starting to enjoy from. First is being able to help you to manage risk better, right? For example, change of personnel that originally provided access and no longer needed. Okay, so you want to make sure that these are being tackled, and this could be assessed or accepted with segmentation. Also, inheritance and through mergers, right? One company acquires another one, or being detached from a company. You want to make sure that you have a policy for that, and using segmentation, you could pretty much easily onboard or offboard such situations, and also simply blindly creating you did something that you had to do in an urgent manner, right? My critical business application is down. I have to get it up and running. Segmentation is a proper way to reference, again, before you go and do things urgently or while you do it. And when it's written, when it's being tracked under a designated tool, it's much easier to do that. Also, segmentation allows you to understand the risk that is associated with the existing policy. And so you will see that once you deploy or set up a proper segmentation, you will immediately see that what you have in your environment have some issues, have some components that do not reside with the policy, with the segmentation policy that you set up. And you need to prioritize and review these going forward. So even for that, once you do segmentation, you will start to see the benefits and start to identify areas that should be addressed right off the box. So this is another key things for segmentation and benefits. In addition, benefits of segmentation is that it sets the stage for general risk analysis and benchmarking. So questions like, can we delineate rules that are riskier compared to others and treat these, with a greater scrutiny? Can we analyze them for usage? Do we need to analyze for usage? These kind of questions and benchmarks could be set once you have a segmentation in place. Another good benchmark example is what are the firewall rules, for instance, should be like, right? Are they allowed to contain as many objects in the source or destinations? Does rules that haven't been used in the last 90 days should stand still? So these types of benchmarks, which, by the way, also being dictated by regulatory compliance, can be vetted using proper segmentation. And speaking about compliance, at the end of the day, this is yet another benchmark that can and should be overviewed with segmentation. Again, a referenceable benchmark means that we can identify existing access rules that are not compliant and also base future decisions using automation for access requests on this particular benchmark of segmentation. Now, you could also define the priorities by zone. So once you start to segment your network, you will be needed to define the different zones that you are segmenting between. And you need to define the priorities. If you have some cyber assets or areas that are more critical or more valuable or more private than another ones, and this is being dictated by regulatory compliance. So think GDPR, think PCI, all of these dictates that you need to isolate your network. So by doing this prioritization, whenever change occurs, you will be able to prioritize what you need to, what exceptions, what what risks you should attend to faster or first rather than later. Last thing, from security perspective, when you logically isolate zones from one another to prevent an attack, you start to better understand what are the areas that you have risk on. Obviously, every organization has a private and sensitive assets, right? You want to protect them. Regulations want you to protect them. Segmentation is the way to do it.
All right, great, Erez, thank you. So one of the things that came up in our conversations and what we want to talk to here, it kind of kept coming back to baselining and measuring and understanding. That's really kind of the value of segmentation in a couple different ways. And I think what we saw was some correlation to it, to the maturity model for security policy management, where it provides kind of a streamlined trajectory towards a balance between security and agility. And along the different kind of stepping stones along the way, we have visibility and cleanup. And I think, from our perspective, that's probably a little bit more reactive on the security side. We're dealing with inherited risk. Whereas right in the middle, we can actually start applying that segmentation policy and using that to analyze change requests and actually design them based upon it, and start approaching some more mature facets like application-driven connectivity and zero touch. So kind of looking at the two, I thought what was kind of interesting, and those things that we just, or you at least narrated, was the ability to be both reactive and proactive at the same time and kind of multitask. And I think based upon that, we kind of have an opportunity to take a look at how we'd actually start a network segmentation process. And I think that's probably a pretty big challenge for organizations too, right? Because typically they're provided some sort of direction from leadership or compelled by a compliance baseline. And in doing so, the biggest question is, like, how do you even get going? So, with that, Erez, I'd ask you a fairly open question. How can organizations even start it?
Right. So it's always a great question, right? Where to start? I think it's more important to ask or to make sure that you at least start, right? And you need to start small, right? Create a referenceable policy. Create a very basic segmentation. Now, a lot of organizations have an oratory tradition, which means that it's subject to people memory. Make this, this knowledge referenceable, right? You never know what's going to happen or what happens. People move, people change. You want to make a proper reference to what should and what shouldn't be happening. Once you have documented and have a referenceable security policy, you'll know how to proceed with making the right decisions. Because you always have a place to go, even when these people which know what to do, change or not around. Another critical thing to have a referenceable security policy, of course, is the automation point of view. If it's written, if it's part of a certain tool, then this could be referenced by other tools. If it's in memory of people's mind, that will be harder to do.
Great. And I think the next question is, once we kind of understand what security policy looks like and we kind of have a referenceable single source of truth, the next challenge is trying to figure out how to enforce it and over what assets. And I think that's a very strong challenge for a lot of organizations that have started seeing separation of responsibilities and duties with the emergence of DevOps, right? Their control over virtual infrastructure. So, Erez, how would companies go about the best way of understanding what network they have that they would need to start operationalizing their security policy within to start segmentation?
Yeah, well, the issue of DevOps of definitely splittered the ownership of the organization infrastructure, namely the virtual infrastructure of an organization. Now is an easy time to determine if it's under, using segmentation. It's a right or good opportunity to start and ask the tough questions whether this area of the network is mine or not. Whose responsibility for this area of the network? And either way, everyone has assets in this game, and the state of your network. You have to know the state of your network, otherwise, you go blind. Also, maybe part of your network is managed by another group, right? Do they want to also segment? Think about you have a different geolocation branch of your organization. Within their network, they also require segmentation. What is the level of segmentation that you want to do? Do they want to contribute to the project and benefit from the same way or not? So this is, maybe the challenges, but also the opportunities that you want to decide and start to segment your network. And we talked about, upcoming mergers and acquisition. Like, who's responsible for that? This is another good opportunity to lift things and start to do things when a segmentation is an issue that start to be on the table.
Great, and thank you for that, Erez. So now that we've covered basically, I guess, how to define our security policy and give it some sort of technical translation in a way that we can apply it to the network, and we've mapped out the network itself too, understanding what we need to apply security policy to. The next question is, how can we even go about managing that, right? And I think you probably have some interesting insight here, how other organizations have approached that.
So yeah, I mean, when it comes to the question of how I can manage it, you have basically two situations. Do we have, and segmentation is obviously for the network. And then you ask yourself, okay, do I have tools that help me to manage my network? Like tools like IPAM. So think about the Infoblocks of the world, the Blue Cat, SolarWinds, all of these guys that, do IPAM this is a good, this is a tool that helps you to manage your network. So when you have such tools, then you need to ask yourself, are these tools capable of scaling to other areas of my network? If not, then figure out a tool that can consolidate different use-specific tools and different other tools to allow you to gain this capability. So once you have these tools, it becomes more, straightforward kind of works, because you have map of your network. You know where to start. You just need to go and start to assign it to the relevant zones, and we will talk about it on a few slides from now. But once you know how your network looks like, this is you are in a good position to start. Now, the worst case scenario, on the other hand, is that you don't have any mapping of your network. You don't have any tools that help you to manage your network, or you don't have any visibility to your network. This is obviously the worst situation to be. But then you need to ask yourself, has anyone done it before? Or, do we have access to best practices to start with? Can my vendors provide technical guidance? Like I have other vendors. I have vendors that, serves at a certain place in my organizations. These vendors have knowledge with networking. They could surely help you to start from somewhere to understand what's going on your network. So again, either way, there are routes that you should go and start from. Obviously, if you have the tools that can help you to manage your network, great. But if you haven't, there should be someone in the organization, or you could get guidance from third parties to do that sooner or later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Erez, I think now that we've discussed a lot of the theory and the preparation work, the next step is actually doing it, right? I think some of the things that we're discussing is how you've kind of worked with clients to start that at kind of a high level and work their way down. Can you walk us through that a little bit, just to give us kind of an idea?
Sure. So, starting, right? Let's take the situation that I have, an IPAM or a tool that helps me to manage my network. And to be frankly, most of the organization have such tools. We engage and speak a lot with different customers. Most, if not all of them, have a certain tool that manage the network. And if they doesn't, they usually know or have like perpetual tools that do that. So once you identify your network, take a look at it from the high level. After you've done it, then you need to start and think about, okay, I need to define the zones, right? Segmentation is all about zones and the relationship between them. And most important, once you start to think about what should be the zones that I should have in my network, when you think about the zones, make them logical, make them with a meaning, right? Not just call them area 1, area 2, or virtual area 3. These zones will doomed at no success because, again, people change. It's hard to manage them. The more zones that you have, the more complex you have, you're going to lose visibility. So you have to do that segmentation based on a certain logical aspect. And it could be, few kinds of logical aspects. For example, regulatory compliance, right? I need to comply with PCI compliance, or with NERC, or with SOX, or with GDPR. These compliance states dictates the zones that should be in your network, the zones that you should be able to divide and control relationship between them. So this is a good logical aspect to start when you want to segment your network, right? PCI has wireless zones, and they have internal zones, and they have databases. These are zones with a logical meaning. So relying on the regulatory compliance is great. By the way, there are tools that provide you with templates of zones. Like you could use a certain template with all the zones that a certain regulations dictating, and then start from there. So regulatory compliance is one way to have a logical zone separation. Another one could be, network best practice, right? I bet every organization out there have 4 or at least 5 major zones that it must have. And if it doesn't, then it should have. So think about the internet zone, internal zone, DMZ zone, partner zone. These are logical zones that, I'm quite certain that every organization out there know how to define, know to attribute the relevant subnets, the relevant VLANs into that zones. So this is another way to create logical aspect of your zones. Also, based on common sense, and again, it returns to regulatory compliance, right? I have an area, a zone that I want to keep all my personal data. Now, it could be different subnets, but all of these subnets, that there are, personal data in them. Cap them under personal data zone. Then you will know that whenever you are being added with another zone with personal data, you know how to assign it into this personal data zone. Private assets could be another name of a zone. Also think about, departments like finance or HRs. These could be zones. Last but not least, and again, there are lots of these kind of logical routines that you could follow. Geolocations, for instance. There are lots of organizations that are segmenting based on geolocations. And again, you don't need to rely just on one. You could have a couple of them in your network. So you could have both geolocation and compliance segmentation. It could be, paralleled together. And most important thing is not to go too far, at least when you are starting, with the number of zones that you want to have in your network. Think prioritization. Try to prioritize what are the top 5, the top 6 zones that you have to have in your network, and start there. Don't go immediately to the tens and hundreds of zones. This is the 3 key aspects that you should and want to look at when you start to segment.
Yeah, thank you, Erez. That was a very good and detailed answer. I thought what was kind of most appropriate now is we could kind of provide a little bit of an illustration here, because we've been talking about this in theory, and it might be appropriate to provide a couple examples. So I was actually thinking of a TUFIN client, our recent customer event, where they were discussing how they apply security policy. It's a very standard security policy, but they apply it across all the zones because it's already agreed to. So once they define a zone itself, they'll apply that security policy, and that way it's documented and referenceable. But security policy will change over time, and they also may take iterations and divide the network into different segments as well. Once they're able to do that, and I guess figure out the different assets that were there are in a different zone and put there for a specific reason, they actually then go about adjusting that policy, either tightening it or loosening it as requirements might be. And then kind of once they got to a point of comfort, they then look at applying that policy again to another zone. And I think this was kind of part of that iterative process. And I think this is kind of a visual abstraction of it, but I know you're probably the most familiar with TUFIN examples, and I thought this would be appropriate to highlight as well, how TUFIN customers in the future, in the past, have used it. And I think before we hop into that, we can also note the different ways to apply security policy. And it's really a 2-part answer, right? One is allowing services between zones, the other one's denying services too. I think also people can get lost in the myriad of details of listing every single service and trying to figure things out, whereas maybe it's easier to and more approachable to just simply list the risky services that they would want to flag as a violation. So when we talk about actually visualizing this and how organizations construct it and manage it, can you walk us through a few of these examples here in terms of like a connectivity or zone-to-zone matrix?
Sure. So, in TUFIN, as you can see here, you could, draw in any type or any number of zones. But as I mentioned earlier, and I think it's the way to start, you need to start somewhere, right? Even if it's anywhere. It's very very appealing to when you start to think about segmentation, start to think big, right? I have my entire network out there. So many zones need to be isolated. So many zones need to be discriminated between one and each other, and you need to have a certain relationship between them. This is usually when you are getting stuck. If you go to the areas that you are familiar with, that you feel comfortable with, this is where you want to start and build your confidence when you start segmentation. So even if you start small, even if you take a flat network, divide it by half, by setting two zones, you are cutting risk in a very significant way. So think about bridge, right? If I am being bridged and my network is flat without any segmentation whatsoever, then the hacker could get into any particular zone, any area that he wish in my network. Divide it by half. Call it outbound or internal zone, external zone and internal zone. Only by that you cut the risk of being hacked into your private zone in a significant way. Also, again, expand to meet the compliance. Iterate the zone based on compliance if you haven't done so already. And of course, operationalize the policy for them based on the technical guidance or security policy that the product that you choose to do it with is giving you. Also, and this is a little bit more advanced, segment as much as you can in a way that you will be comfortably manage it, right? If you have too many zones and things become unmanageable, then you know that you need to stop and think and rethink again whether this is the right way to go or to change it. You want to make your segmentation manageable. And as I mentioned earlier, this has to start, first you have to start small. Second, you have to start and make sure that you have logical zones, not just, virtual 1, virtual 2, virtual 3, just as we saw in the previous slide. You have to have meaning to your zones, whether they are regulatory and whether they are geolocation or all together. They have to have a meaning. It could be also expanded to different areas in your network, whether they are SDN-based or public cloud zones designated by IP ranges and security groups. It doesn't matter. You still have the means to make sure you have the means to do it and start to build it until you get to the point that you feel that is not manageable anymore.
Thank you, Erez. And I think now that we've talked about the theory and approach and how organizations approach it, maybe now we should move into some of the challenges that are faced along the way. And I think one of the things that you mentioned a few times was not overcomplicating, right? And starting at kind of a basic step. So in terms of that, what are the challenges that organizations have faced in that kind of biting off too much out the gate, and then trying to balance that with manageability?
Yeah, so this is very clear. Trying to do too much all at once will create analysis paralysis, right? Don't try to eat more than you can chew. You need to adopt an incremental approach to ensure that you are not breaking things as you go. And you need to make sure that, again, the target is not to have as many zones as needed. The target is not to segment as much as you can. The target is to start somewhere and build your segmentation in a manageable way. And again, you need to approach it with a thoughtfulness towards your time. Do not, capture. Do not go into a path that you're going to that can get complicated. So pick on the areas again that you are familiar with and start there. Not try to fix everything in your network right off the spot. Start at the places that you know the better, and then expand from there.
I think at kind of the heart of segmentation too is right. Like if you're approaching it in a way to identify violations to your policy, you're probably triggering a lot of alerts. And I think there was an Imprivata study that came out maybe a month or two ago. It said I think 27% of information security engineers out there receive over like 1 million alerts a day. And in the context of segmentation, I feel like those alerts can kind of get combined with other ones too. And with that deluge of information, what are some of the pitfalls with that?
Yeah, so you referenced to a very nice article that I also familiar with about the fact that 73% of the security administrators state that they get over 1 million alerts over day. So 1 million violations. Think about, I think I created the best segmentation out there, but this segmentation, which is very very strict and very thorough, generates me millions of violations on a certain day. This is not manageable. This is not the place that you want to be. Also, this particular survey, asked the question, so what are the, how you act upon this kind of results? And it turned out that more than 50% of the respondents said that because they have more alerts or plenty of alerts, they reduce the benchmark of getting an alert, resulting in getting less alerts. So you don't want to gather. You want to you want to keep it in a manageable area, and you want to be able to act upon and do something with all the violations that you may be exposed to. So this is the key. Keep it manageable, again, and make sure that you're acting, and the security admins or the security professionals, they're supposed to act upon these violations, could actually do something about it, and they're not being overwhelmed with too many alerts that eventually will be left aside.
Thank you, Erez. It's interesting because we've been talking a lot about manageability of the process itself. And I think moving towards at least what that idea of segmentation is and operationalizing it within the network. But as we've also mentioned before, the network is subject to change. And one of the biggest, I think, challenges we see organizations face is that at some point they put the flag in the ground and they say, all right, mission accomplished. But that's not really the case with segmentation, right?
Correct. Because, as you mentioned, networks are dynamic, especially when you're adding cloud assets. You had private and public cloud assets to your organizations. The network is dynamic. You cannot stand still. There's no point in security where you could put down a flag, as you mentioned, and say, hey, I'm done. Everything is working smoothly. If you have such point in time, then you know that something is wrong. Because hackers, they're not standing still. They try to find more and more ways to influence your network. As a result, you need to make sure that your security posture, among it the segmentation posture, being always updated, being always adapted to the network changes that you have in your organization. And again, there is no single organization that doesn't have changes in the network. People leave, people on board, companies acquire more companies, situations happen, urgency matters happen, and things change in the network. You need to make sure that your segmentation keeping up to speed with all the changes in your network, and there are ways to do that, right? As I mentioned earlier, there are tools that manage your network. Integrate these tools into tools that provide you with proper segmentation. By doing that, you could achieve an adaptive segmentation, because if you correlate between the zones that your network guys are managing and the security guys are managing using the segmentation, you could assure that whatever happens to a certain zone that contain a certain subnet or a certain VLAN, if something changes in these zones, it will be automatically fed into your segmented zones in your network. So first and foremost, make sure not to stand still. Security is not a target, it's a journey. You need to always see what happens in your network, what happens in your organization, and make sure that the tools and segmentation that you stated adapt to it.
Great, thank you, Erez. So it's interesting to consider like everything that we've just discussed, right? I think it's kind of a cyclical process where we're identifying like an end goal. We don't want to make it complicated, right? We want it to be incremental. And then we want to use that next state to kind of get into the next one and then make sure that we're repeating this process. And I think that's the model we see from a lot of very successful companies that have done a very good job of segmenting their networks and doing so in a manageable way. So getting kind of more so into the TUFIN aspect of stuff, and I think the broader realm of segmentation too, Erez and I have covered kind of basic segmentation strategies, right? We talked a little bit about the private and public cloud, but as we kind of look at the more complex nature of segmentation, there's also the theory of nano segmentation, right? And that can be constructed at the container level. And it's something that organizations may be aware of now, and it's something that they'll probably want to consider moving in the forward. And as you forge forward on your segmentation project, it'll be something that you'll want to keep a note on in the future. So a couple of the screenshots we've shown included kind of the zone-to-zone based matrix that's included within TUFIN. There's actually been a couple questions that have been asked. So just very quickly, we won't spend really any time talking about the product. If people are interested, please do feel free to go to the TUFIN website and request a demo. But the way that TUFIN actually enables this is through our infrastructure abstraction layer, and we can take all the different firewalls, including next generation firewalls, network devices, public cloud, private cloud, and abstract that policy into a single pane of glass. So all the different vendors have their data enriched and then can be reviewed, and then actually that policy can be modified, and the connectivity through services can be modeled in the zone-to-zone based matrices, which enables organizations to identify violations, but also base future changes based upon that segmentation model, which, when in line with compliance, can enable that continuous compliance mandate. And that is through our secure change product, which is change automation based on workflows. And one of the kind of endpoints we talked about in that maturity model is kind of application-driven connectivity. So as the ability to merge security and agility are required for the business, our product Secure App enables organizations to extend an application-driven perspective to DevOps teams to shield some of the network responsibilities from them and actually provide them the opportunity to speak within the terms that they need to and provide network teams the ability to ensure application connectivity at that point and moving forward despite changes. And as we mentioned before, there's a couple different matrices examples that we've shown. This is one of them that can be found within TUFIN, and red boxes would delineate services that are listed as blocked. Green services would be listed as, or denoted as services that can be allowed. So this is a really easy way to at least visualize that policy, but also use it as a referenceable model. And at the end of the day, I mean, TUFIN, in the context of compliance and much more, enables the implementation of security changes in minutes instead of days, based upon that compliance benchmark. So that enables the continuous compliance with your security policy and standards, and reduces the complexity of that, hybrid cloud and multi-vendor network environment. So with that being said, we're happy to take questions. There are a few we have right now that are kind of use case specific, so I may not necessarily answer them directly. Erez, someone is asking here, would I ever want to have two different zone-to-zone based policies or models? I think that's what they're trying to say.
Yeah, I think this is a valid and very good question, right? Sometimes you have different reasons that you may want to segment. So I translate this question into, should I have two types of segmentation or two segmentation maps or matrices in my organization? The answer is, of course. There are different reasons to segment, and they're all valid. Organizations, especially mid-sized to large and enterprise size, need to segment based on different means. So think regulation, think compliance, think geolocation. These are one of the types of segmentations that customers would want to go, but also think about it from change perspective, and especially from automation perspective. When someone asking a certain access between one zone to another, having a one single segmentation sometimes would be less descriptive, in times that this type of request violating a certain, or creating a certain risk. By having two types of segmentation correlated and correlated into an automation tool, for instance, like we do in Tufin, then whenever a risk is involved with the access request, by having two types of segmentation, we will immediately could tell you whether this request violates your geolocation segmentation, or violates your PCI segmentation, or simply violates your corporate segmentation. Like someone asking an access between a private zone to DMZ, and this is restricted. We don't want to allow that. But we also try to have access between two zones that do allow access. So using different layers of segmentation, you will be able to narrow down what the risk might be. In this case, it's a regulatory risk, not a geolocation kind of risk. So the answer is yes.
All right, so here's another interesting, I guess, kind of theoretical one. Someone's mentioned that they have network segmentation in place, and they see violations, but they're necessary for the business. What are methods for, I guess, dealing with them?
So, I see violations as, someone set a policy, right? Someone asking something that violates this policy. Obviously, this is a violation. Now, there are two answers for that. Whether this is really a violation, if it is really a violation, that you're not supposed to allow it. There could be something, or under certain circumstances, that you may want to allow it, and then you could use exception mechanism to do that. Like, okay, I know it's urgent. This is coming from my CEO. This is for a critical, application and so forth. And I need to make sure it's up and running, but I know this is a violation. So I'm accepting it and setting up an exception for 2 days. So at least we will have the ability to manage this crisis while the business is more calmed down. So this is one way to manage it. And another way, if this violation is not a violation, then everything is okay. So again, there are two scenarios here. Whether it's a part of the policy, and if a violation is actually part of the policy, then it's not a violation. You need to go and fix your segmentation policy. And if it is a violation, a true violation, then either just don't let it go, or use a certain exception mechanism to manage it. But make sure it's this exception doesn't last forever. Otherwise, it should be part of the policy.
All right, thank you, Erez. And we've got a handful of other questions. They're kind of specific to the product, and I don't necessarily want to get into that with the broader audience. So I guess if there's no more questions, I just want to thank you for your time, Erez. It's been very helpful and insightful. And thank everyone else for their participation today.
Thank you, Don. Pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.